So this next episode is going to be sports talk with my dad. We intended on touching on other subjects like movies and music and traveling. But with that being said, we really only had time for sports. We went for about an hour. So this is a really cool conversation that kind of touches on our generational divide and the different things we've been able to see in athletics. So athletics is my greatest love. I intend to have some sort of career with sports. I grew up playing just about every sport, and something I definitely cherish and try to stick with on a week-by-week basis. So with that being said, thank you guys. Enjoy the episode. I'll go ahead and start. And one thing I noticed when I was starting the process of creating the list is the generational divide is going to be pretty big, because
Right.
the first list I have is favorite UT athletes, and I've got a bunch of shit to work with.
I know.
You know what I mean?
I know.
I don't have as much of a good history to work with.
I've got a good run right now.
Yeah. But so I'll do we're going to be doing Mount Rushmores, which is essentially pick your favorite 4 items in a given category. We'll be starting with UT athletes, and for whatever reason, the first one that came to mind for me was Wayne Chisholm.
Wayne Chisholm. Yeah. He's a great player.
He was good. I think he was 10 years too early. I think he would have been an NBA player if he just played 10 years later, because he was big, he was a generalist, but he could shoot really well.
He got a shot.
Yeah.
I remember he got a shot. I just don't know whatever happened with it. And he used to come back and play in all the alumni games.
Was it the Rocky Tub League out of Catholic? I remember seeing him play.
Yeah, something like that. I think they played various places, but I know they played there quite a bit. A lot of those guys would come back. He was always a big fan favorite. I think he had a headband he wore.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
He
mention.
shot
Headband.
everything from the top of the key.
Yeah.
Shot everything from there.
Headband. And then I got, let's go quickly, Eric Berry.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to put him in there because it's recent, but Hendon Hooker had the best season the quarterbacks had since the 90s. And Josh Richardson, because I remember Josh Richardson was quite literally terrible for 2 years.
For 2 years.
He was really bad, and he was just the definition of a hard worker and put things together, because he inevitably put in more hours than everybody else and pieced itself together.
Yeah, everybody talks about Bernard King and Ernie Grunfeld, and they were great. I saw many games that they played in when they were young. And as a matter of fact, I think Bernard King even got suspended for 3 games. I remember the game back. I was at that game. It was at the old Stokely Athletic Center. And he was a bit of a character. He was a different kind of cat, quite honestly. But my favorite UT basketball player was Dale Ellis. Anybody that ever watched him play in the pros, he disappeared for a few years. I don't know the exact facts, but he averaged 6-7 points a game. He was 8th or 9th player taken in the draft. Really good player. But he played inside at UT. He never shot outside. He had a little jump hook that just nobody could stop him. He was only 6'7". He was playing against guys like Sam Bowie and Melvin Turpin, who played for Kentucky, and these guys were like legitimate 7-footers. And I remember one time I got a hold of a Kentucky basketball preseason guide, and had a profile of all their players, and had 3 or 4 of those guys were what would be considered lottery draft picks today. I don't know if they had the lottery back then, but they were all top 10 players chosen in draft. They asked every one of them, every player on the team, to name their top 5 best opponents they played against. And there were various players. Only one player did every player on the team say was one of the best players they played against. And that was Dale Ellis. And he was something else. And he really was. And once that guy go to the NBA, become what he did, and it was something else. I mean, he was unbelievable.
I remember I have a Dale Ellis basketball card somewhere. I think you probably gave it to me.
Yeah.
I've got one somewhere.
A lot of those.
But who are your other 3 UT athletes?
Golly, I always really liked Charlie Garner. We only had him for 2 years, I think, because he was a junior college player. we already had two good running backs. We had Aaron Hayden and Little Man Stewart, and they were both really good. And then this guy comes in, and he's better than both of them. Fast. He was a little like a Barry Sanders and had a huge pro career. I think he's still like in the top 10 all time rushing. He was really something else. He was great to watch. And I know he didn't have much of a pro career, but Heath Schuler was a great player to watch in college. He was, man. He was a bit of a throwback. He would run the ball. He had a big arm, perfect for that offense. He really jump-started it. He was a junior when Peyton Manning was coming to UT. And he just, I don't know. Like I said, I thought he would be a lot better in the pros. I guess it just didn't get the right situation. But I think he went to Washington or someplace, ended up in New Orleans. He was a great athlete, though. He was a really great athlete.
And I don't know anything about Heath Schuler, but I've always found it cool when quarterbacks wear weird numbers. I think he's probably the only one of the handful.
Like 29 or 21. 21 was his number.
Yeah. What else you got?
I guess the other one would be Carl Pickens, great wide receiver. Oddly enough, he was a second-round draft pick, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Went to Cincinnati and played up there forever. There was a story. We had a coach here named Kippy Brown, which a lot of people remember Kippy Brown. He was always on former staffs. He'd been to other places. I think he may have even had a head coaching job or two. But he was the player development guy. He was who they all talked to on the side. And the story goes that he came into his office one day when he was like a sophomore and said, "I'm quitting. I'm going home." And Keith Brown said, "Okay." And he pulled the telephone over. It was still back in the rotary days, the telephone or push button. They weren't cell phones. He said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm getting your mom on the phone so you can tell her." And he's like, "Let's hold off a second." Yeah, no, he was unbelievable. He was a great athlete. His freshman year, he played safety because we didn't have a safety. He was like defensive MVP of the Cotton Bowl or something, if I remember correctly. But he was a great player. He really was. And there was a lot of good. I remember we played. I guess it was his junior year. Alvin Harper was on the team. Mm-hmm. We played Notre Dame. We got beat. It's when they had the Rocket. And the Rocket ran a punt back and then almost ran another one back. But if you go back and look at that team between Notre Dame and Tennessee, there was so much pro talent on the field. I think Ricky Jackson was a running back. Chris Zorid. Jerome Bettis, I think, was on that team. Rick Meyer, who was like the number 2 pick player in the draft. We had Alvin Harp, Antone Davis, Charles McCray. A lot of great defensive players. Chris Mims, Chuck Smith, just Dale Carter was on that team. Had a couple of good. It was like everybody that was there got drafted. A lot of them pretty high. But I remember that it was one of the few times where I've seen the 98 team. They put more talent on the field, but that was an incredible team to watch. And they still went like 10-2-1 or 10-1-2. They didn't even, they played so conservatively all year that they didn't. I think they won the Sugar Bowl after falling way behind in the game. Virginia, I think we played them. They had a big guy named Herman Moore, who was a wide receiver, may have been the number 1 player taken in the draft. He was like 6'5", which was unheard of back then, but a great player. But great as the atmosphere is now, it was a big atmosphere back then too. It was really different. Tell people now it's odd because you can't find tickets anywhere. Back then, you made 3 phone calls and you had a handful of tickets, but it was still packed. And the stadium was still full, but everybody got in that wanted to get in. See, I don't know really what's caused that. Knoxville's bigger certainly than it was then, but it was like there were tickets everywhere, and the tailgating was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was just a blast.
A different demographic now, because if you're a student, you can get in pretty easily, but if you're not, you've got to have a little money, and the fans who pay a little money probably aren't going to be on their feet the whole time.
Yeah, I think back then it's never been cheap to get tickets. You didn't have to lay down $5,000 just to be able to get tickets or whatever the cost is now. I don't even know what it is. Back then, you always found tickets, even to the Florida game. You always, and the stadium was packed, but you always had tickets. You had good tickets. And it was great. It's thrilling to see Tennessee back doing well in sports again, because we went through a period there and just like none of them were doing very well.
Yeah, I'll touch on, I was hesitant to put them on there just because of the recency bias, because just we've had such a great history with Peyton and the whole run in the 90s and the 80s. But Hendon Hooker had the best season that we've had any player have in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
And when nobody expected it, it was all mental. That was the cool thing about it. There were 5-star quarterbacks at other schools. You had Bryce Young. You had Georgia, who was just unreal, which we got spanked. But
sure.
But Heupel really cut out the distractions and just got these guys to make good, clean decisions the whole year. And he was stoic. That was the cool thing about him. He'd get rocked every now and then, and he'd get back up, and same exact look on his face. He'd throw a touchdown, and he'd celebrate with his receiver for a second, and then he'd go right back to the sideline and worry about the next drive. And it was just all mental this year. I thought that was the coolest thing about it. They were very mentally strong this year. And
they were. It's one of those things where I saw that when Bruce Pearl took over the basketball team. All of a sudden, you had these guys that some of them were highly recruited, most of them weren't. The football team was probably more highly recruited than his basketball teams, but all of a sudden they believed they could win and thought they were supposed to. It's the way it is. And I played in some teams growing up, and the ones that were the best were the ones that we expected to win. We didn't take it for granted, but you always expected we were going to pull it out, figured out how to do it.
Yeah.
And we had one bad game this year, probably prophetic that we did. And honestly, we ended up where we belonged. And
nobody really came close to beating Georgia at the end of the day. The way it seems to me, if Hendon Hooker hadn't gotten hurt, you look at the handful of teams at the end of the year, I think we're probably the second or third best team in the country this year.
Very possible. On any given Saturday, yeah.
I think Ohio State, we're probably contending with them, but I think we're better than Michigan. I think we're definitely better than TCU. Beat Alabama. I don't know that we're better than Alabama or that we just caught them on the right night.
They were 2 plays from being in the playoff. Plays on the last, special teams plays on the last play of the game. So they had a couple of close calls too, but they were a good team. Be interesting to see what happens with them next year, because they'll be breaking in somebody that nobody knows. That quarterback, so we'll see how that goes.
At the same time, you have Joe Milton, who I don't think anybody would deny he's probably the most talented quarterback in the country. There's not a better quarterback on paper than Joe Milton as far as like measurables. But the thing about it is it's going to be his 3rd year in the system now.
Yeah.
And he very easily could really put together a great year next year. We hit all those long balls this year, and there's not anybody in the country that can throw it further than him.
Further than that guy.
Yeah. Did you see the video of him throwing that orange before the Orange Bowl?
No.
He threw an orange 110 yards. He threw it from the back of the end zone. He threw it from our end zone and hit the base pad of one of the lights on the other side of the field.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, he's
like Bo Jackson kind of stuff.
Yeah. And he's big and strong too. You can't really get him down. And he doesn't always make the best decisions, but there's not a better quarterback on paper than Joe Milton. And so it's just going to be interesting to see. Yeah. He won the starting job over Hendon Hooker too. I think he maybe got in his head a little, but bring him back. We'll see. We'll run it back, see how he does next year.
Yeah.
All righty. We'll move on to favorite NBA players. I've got LeBron, I think, only because he was my first kind of exposure to basketball. I think I probably started watching basketball when I was around like 4 or 5. So he would have been drafted a couple years before that. So he was obviously like the up and coming guy. And I'm not as fond of his career as far as like the LA years, but just touching on like the early part of his career, I just loved the way he made decisions and how he put trust in his own teammates. Because if it was the end of the game, and if it was Kobe or Michael Jordan,
they were going to take the last shot. And it didn't matter who was on him. But with LeBron, he's willing to, if he's getting double teamed, find the shooter in the corner. And he's made that decision countless times, and he's always put trust in his teammates. And when his teammates let him down, everybody's like, he should have been selfish. And when they make it, he's a good teammate. He always has put trust in his teammates. And the thing about it, too, is it's like, he never won with the Cavaliers. He came close a couple times. He made the finals when he was
3 times, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, he made the finals, and he was like 23 or 24 against the Spurs. And
Only good player.
They had nobody on that team. Nobody on that team. But at the end of the day, I think he probably changed basketball for the worse with going to the Heat, but he was never going to win anything with the Cavaliers. And so it was probably the right decision at the end of the day.
Those super teams have been around forever. The old Boston LA series, when you had Magic and Bird.
And take it back to the 60s.
Yeah. But those teams were loaded basketball teams. They were loaded. Each one of them's got like 4 Hall of Famers on it. And arguably, you could say Kareem, somebody said he was the best player they ever saw, and you couldn't say they were crazy. He was unstoppable. He basically had one move. It was the skyhook. That's all he did. And everybody tried to duplicate it. We tried to duplicate it when we were in middle school, tried to do a skyhook, and we'd clang it off the back of the rim. He was just an amazing player. He was huge. He was 7'2", get up and down the court. And you always picked one of your two. You always loved Boston or hated LA or vice versa. I was always a Boston fan. I was a big Larry Bird fan and liked Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson, Cornbread Maxwell. These players were all just really good players. And in some ways, they were like all in the top 2 or 3 at their position on both teams. You had obviously Magic. James Worthy was an incredible basketball player. And I was a big North Carolina fan when James Worthy was there. Sam Perkins and Jordan all played on that team that won and barely beat Georgetown for the national championship with Patrick Ewing and Reggie Williams. And they were a great team. I always had a soft spot for Bird just because he was my first favorite player. But Jordan comes along and I mean, he's just, I don't know. It was one of those things where I thought he would be pretty good. Then all of a sudden, you're like 10 games into the season of his rookie year, and he's averaging like 28 points or something like that. What on earth? Is he the only guy shooting, or what was the deal? And they were a little soft, though. They weren't a real good team. They were a run and gun team until Phil Jackson got there, and they got a little more tough mentally. But Jordan can't be denied as one of the best players, maybe the best player. He should be everybody's top 2 or 3.
Yeah. I mean, it's Tom Brady on the TV screen, and I think it's pretty easy to say I'm the biggest LeBron fan in the world just because of when I was born and when he started playing, and I got to see all the great moments. But look at Tom Brady. There are a lot of 6'4" quarterbacks who are slow and unathletic, and there are a lot of 6'6" guards in the NBA. There's something within both of those guys that isn't within everybody else. Think of all the athletic freaks that play in the NBA. There's Andrew Wiggins right there. He's cut and paste the exact height and weight, athleticism as Michael Jordan. But he doesn't have the mental side of it.
He doesn't.
And it's not to say he's not a bad player. He's one of the best players in the world, relatively. But there's something that just individuals apart, and some people have it, and some people don't. And really only a handful of people have it. And that's in every sport.
Yeah.
So it's...
Yeah, it's odd. Those NBA players, there's an old player, too, that doesn't get much. Thing was, he played on a bad team for a long time, but until he got with the 76ers. But Moses Malone he was 6'10". You say only 6'10", but that was back when everybody had to have a 7-foot center. If you didn't have a 7-foot center, you weren't legitimate. But he would have 20 rebounds a game. He was just unstoppable. It reminded me a lot of Hakeem Olajuwon, which when he was at Houston, he was a 7-footer and all this other stuff, and he was highly athletic. But when he got drafted, they measured him, and he was only like 6. He wasn't 7 foot, but he had some offensive moves that you just could not. They were not trainable. And I always wondered, because he grew up in Nigeria, so he didn't really even know basketball until he was about 18.
Yeah.
So he only got taught good stuff to do. He didn't have any bad habits that had to be broken. Amazing player.
And that touches on like my favorite current day player, which love him or hate him, but God, I love watching Joel Embiid play. And And I like him so much because I never got to watch Hakeem other than the highlights. But I remember watching him play for about 5 minutes at Kansas. And I was just like, all right, well, that's the next Hakeem.
Yeah.
And he didn't have any offensive game at that point, but he was fluid. And I don't know that this is the case, but it seems like it is just because of his footwork. But he had to grow up playing soccer.
He did.
Yeah.
He was a goalie, I think.
Yeah. So having that dexterity with your feet translates it. And that's across sports. And you look at Lomachenko was a ballet dancer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Hakeem was a soccer player, and Embiid played soccer and volleyball. And it's like a lot of these great guys have these, have experience in more than one sport. And I always thought that was dumb about us growing up is in high school, they really only let you play one sport at Beard.
Yeah.
It was just like none of the coaches got along. And if you've got a special guy, put him in every sport.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let him play year round and see how things work out.
Especially if you're not a quarterback or something like that, where you've got to throw 5 billion balls to get good at it. If you're a wide receiver or something, let them play the various sports. It was odd, and it's a terrible example of it. But I played flag football when I was in college, and we were really good. We won the campus a couple of times, got to go to the national tournament in New Orleans. And so it wasn't tackle football. It was essentially basketball. And it was boxing out, pick and roll. That's what it was. It was basketball integrated in with a football is essentially what it was. And nobody was real big. If you were 6'4" and weighed 270 pounds, you couldn't play the sport because everybody, these little guys just run around you. But that's all it was. And we were really good. I was pretty good at it and what I did, but the role I had on the team, but it was all rolled back to basketball, all of it. And so I cannot speak for baseball. I was never in love with baseball, but
you've got to be a lazy kind of person to enjoy baseball, golf.
Yeah.
I hate to be that way, but it's just a lot of standing around. I've had arguments with friends about this, and I have a lot of friends who are like, baseball and golf aren't sports, which I don't agree with. I think they're sports, but it's like that level of physical exhaustion and pain you have to feel on a daily basis when you play a sport like basketball or football that's the best part of it. I remember, I'll take it back to high school. I remember we ran 250-yard shuttle, which is, 25 yards down and back 12 times. And so I would be running with the first group, and I was by far the slowest in the first group. It was me and the state champ 400-meter relay, essentially. Right. He was the fastest kids at the school, and we had a lot of fast kids. And we weren't the best school, but our track team was really good. And I remember it came time to test week, and we ran it individually, and this is a week before the season. And so I got to run it by myself for the first time, and I just loved the feeling of pushing yourself to your absolute limit. I ran it in, I think, 48 or 49 seconds. And because I was not racing against anybody who I knew was faster than me, I got the best time on the team, but immediately vomited everywhere before I even finished. I was running across the line, just throwing up everywhere. But I love that part of it. I want to go and try to run it again. I've been trying to do it this week. Take 30 minutes to go run a 250-yard shuttle. I love that part about sports.
Yeah. When I grew up in a really small town, I didn't know how small it was. There's people, it was Claxton community. It's been there for 70 or 80 years, known as Claxton. And still I run into people all day long that had never heard of Claxton. We had really good teams in football and had a lot of good athletes from that little community. But the only thing that you did was context. There weren't options for anything outside of football, basketball, and to an extent baseball. But most of the kids, if they were any good, went to a neighboring town to play, like Clinton or something like that, or Oak Ridge. But it's all we had. We played basketball and we played football, and played the other small towns up in Campbell County and Anderson County. It was a blast. It really was. We didn't realize how we'd have to come play a really good team from someplace every now and then, and that we'd get shellacked. But we were typically pretty good. We would win 2/3, 3/4 of our games, and sometimes more if we had a good ace player or two. The kids I grew up with, and I didn't play football in high school. There were some kids that I played with that were really good players. My best friend, he went to Citadel on scholarship, ended up transferring, walked on at Georgia, and we just we thought we were as good as everybody. We just didn't know. But every now and then we'd walk out, especially on the basketball court, and people were all a foot taller than we were. Yeah, it was sucky, but
Yeah, I'll get back to the discussion at some point. But I remember you play against a lot of these guys, and you have these. You said you didn't realize how small of a town you were, and you do get shellacked sometimes, but that teaches you to be a man. I remember I was a part of the worst loss in Bearden football history. I got knocked out on the third play by Shaton Mobley, who broke my ankle in sixth grade, but
remember him.
God, dude, Shaton was so good. If she ever sees this, just know that you knocked me out for the season twice. But I think he went and played at NTSU, I think.
Yeah.
We had the best season in 5 or 6 years that next season because we'd just been through the rut and we were like, all right, this isn't going to do. And we went and got a new coach, a guy who knew what he was doing. We had the exact same players. If anything, that senior class that was so bad was better than the next senior class. It was just a matter of being in the dirt and realizing we don't want to be doing this anymore.
Yeah.
We want to keep playing football, but we don't want to keep losing. So we figured things out. It was a lot better season that next year. It wasn't great, but we had a lot of really high moments that were a fun time to be a part of. But
yeah, y'all had some good years after that. That was a tough one. I think y'all won your last game of the season in a bowl game or something like that.
Yeah, I remember we lost to that year. We were pretty good my junior year. We had a lot of confidence going into the playoffs because we beat Dobbins Bennett, we beat Bradley Central, we beat Science Hill. We had a lot of good wins, and all right, we feel good. We're playing Seagulls, worst team in Murfreesboro, and we did not find out until 15 minutes before kickoff. Oh yeah, by the way, Seagulls running back's a Vandy commit, and their defensive end is one of the top 10 freshmen in the country.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember that kid, I think he was a 4 or 5 star. He transferred to somewhere else to a prep school, and he went to South Carolina and played. God, they had a defensive end, freshman that just tore us up. He was like 6'5", 270. Made no sense. We just got destroyed. It is what it is. You win some, you lose some.
You win some, you lose some.
But I'll get back to the basketball. So, as my other 2 players, as my 4, I've got LeBron, Embiid, Luka Doncic, and Larry Bird. You touched on Larry, and obviously more about him. But Luka, I think, channels a lot of that Larry energy, where it's just, yeah, he's the same height, weight as a lot of these guys, but he's no comparison athletically, but he's just mentally stronger than anybody else out there on the court.
Yeah.
And Mark Jackson says he's a bad man, but he's just got that killer mentality of I'm gonna destroy you every time up and down the court. I remember, I don't watch the NBA as much anymore, but God, it was really cool to see him by himself essentially destroy the Suns in that game 7.
Oh yeah.
Weren't they up by like 45 points
Something
at the
like
end of
that.
the second,
Yeah.
at the end of the half?
Yeah.
And it was just
That
him.
was yeah.
That's how LeBron plays too. He's a slower, more methodical LeBron, and he gets everybody involved, and that's why he gets so many open shots. He's not the best 3-point shooter in the world, but when you've got every other guy open on a wing or in the corner or left alone under the basket, get a lot of open shots. So,
Yeah, he is. I'll toss another name out there though, because he's just he's an unbelievable athlete. And that's Giannis. It's one of those things where if everybody said, okay, everybody's off the team, we're going to just draw teams now, who would be the number 1 player picked? Would it be Luka or would it be Giannis? You would definitely consider Embiid, but he gets hurt a lot.
I'm the biggest Embiid fan, but no, it's Luka and Giannis, are 2 most valuable players, clearly.
They just literally, if you're like, okay, who would you pick second to go with those guys? I've thought about that. And that's going to be Luka's issue right now is he's a bit of a ball hog. And so how are you going to get a guy that's going to come in there unless you get like a Chris Middleton or somebody like that wants to come in and be the number 2? But most of them are fine doing that if they're going to win championships, but who knows if you will or not.
I will say, I'm pretty sure he's on their team. Now, I don't really watch the NBA anymore, but Spencer Dinwiddie has been an underrated combo guard where he's not necessarily the guy bringing it up the court, but I think he is the type of guy that should be playing with Luka. And
Pressure off.
Yeah, I mean, they could probably improve on that. There's probably a few better wingmen in the league that you could have, but you really do need a guy who's comfortable just taking the open shots and comfortable not bringing it up, because at the end of the day, you want Luka with the ball in his hands making the decisions. But so I thought we were going to go through this whole list, but I guess we can just stick with sports, honestly.
Well, we can do everything.
We can do a few.
The camera's still on?
Yeah, it's on.
Cool.
As long as the red light's going.
Right.
But we can just stick with sports. We can make other podcasts in the future. We can split up. So I'll move on to favorite teams, and this is in all sports.
All sports.
Yeah, which is funny because I wrote 2 basketball and football teams, and then I left this one blank for a few days, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to put Liverpool 1920 in there because it was the run that got me into soccer, which is honestly like the only sport I really watch now, just because it's so much more accessible from a TV perspective. I'm not trying to stay up until 8 or 9 o'clock or till 8 or 9 o'clock kickoff or tip off to watch these games anymore. I remember watching Vanderbilt versus UT a week ago, and it threw off my whole day. I mean, it was like my whole day the next day, and it was just like. So I really enjoy with soccer that you can get up at 8 o'clock in the morning, games run until about 2, and the game is start 45 minutes. You get 15 minutes of commercials, you get another 45 minutes, and it's over. And there's no stops, there's no timeouts. It's just all the way through. But
unlike American football is a great sport. We grew up with it. I know the rules, and there's 5,000 rules in football, American football. There's not. You get explained offsides and a few things like that, and what a foul does look like, or a tackle, or whatever. They kind of police themselves out there,
which is the cool part. Because when you watch basketball, a pickup game is more fun to watch because you call your own fouls. Yeah. Everybody hates when referees take things in their own hands, and that's the big issue that everybody has with modern soccer is that, we hate VAR. Like, everybody in Europe just hates it. They're like, just make the decision and move on.
You want to get it done right.
Yeah.
There was a World Cup in South America.
Maradona?
No, it was, I remember this game because the U.S. was playing Portugal and was up like 2-1 with 10 seconds left. And Ronaldo streaks down the field, or down the pitch, and dinks the ball over the goalie and ties the game up. Like, literally, there was no time left on the clock. It was an extra period, I believe, but there were a ton of offsides called, weren't really, or they weren't called and they should have been. It almost got to the point where it looked fixed at times. So I don't mind it as long as they can just move through it quickly. It used to be in the NFL when they went to the video. God, it'd take 10 minutes just to make a call, and they've gotten so much better about it now.
Yeah, and they've gotten better about that in soccer, which they don't even have they still have a offsides. I don't know if they call it a referee or an offsides official that's his sole job is to watch offsides. They got one referee in the middle of the pitch who keeps track of all those fouls, and then one guy on each side of the field who watches the offsides. But you need VAR because have you heard the hand of God with Maradona? I'm pretty sure it was the World Cup final or semifinal against England. And it was 10 minutes left in the game, and they cross it into him. And it looks from the wide angle, he headed it in, but he just hit it with his hand right into the goal.
Yeah.
So you do need it. But touching back on Liverpool, that was one of the coolest athletic experiences I've ever seen, because they're playing Barcelona, who this is essentially Messi's last great run at Barcelona. I think they had a good year the year after that, and then one more year, and then he went to PSG. But I remember watching this, and I had just gotten into watching Liverpool, and in the first leg of it, which they play two-legged games, in the first leg of it, Messi hit one of the most beautiful free kicks I've ever seen. It's cool when they have those angles from where they're kicking it, where you can see that the ball see the ball actually swings out further than the post and then just winds its way back in.
Right.
And it was beautiful. And they got up 3-0. And this was back when they had what do they call it? The home goal rule, where it was the team that scores the most goals, away goal rule. The team that scores the most goals away wins. And so they're down 3-0 and they have to come back to Liverpool. It's alrighty. Best player in the world. They're down 3-0. this is over. Barcelona's going to park the bus, as they say, and just play defense and just hope for a 0-0 draw. And the other thing about it was, by far the two best players on the team. Like, if this was the Bulls, MJ and Scottie Pippen were both hurt in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. It's like, all right, they've got no chance. So Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane are both out. And so it's like, all right, they have no chance. And I think James Milner, who's this super old journeyman midfielder, hit a goal. And they scored 3 more goals. And so miraculously, it was tied. And then in, the 70th or 80th minute, Trent Alexander-Arnold, who at the time is 19 years old. He's one of the up-and-coming fullbacks in the world, but he's 19. And they have Divock Origi, who's the backup striker, who he's come up with a bunch of crazy goals, but he transferred to Milan, and he can't even get on the field. But he's in the game, and so there's a corner kick, and everybody on Barcelona is like preparing the formation. They're like, all right, how are we going to line up? And Trent Alexander-Arnold makes eye contact with Divock Origi, and usually they take a nice little, like a field goal kicker, they take their 3 steps back, they plan their steps. He makes eye contact with Origi, turns around and turns right back around, takes 1 step and just crosses it in, low cross. Nobody's even paying attention. Nobody realizes the ball has been kicked other than these 2 guys, and it's just in the back of the net. Crowd goes insane, and it's like they pulled off the complete Hail Mary against the best team in the world at the time, and then they go on to beat Tottenham in the League final, which was an unexciting game, but just watching those 2 legs of that matchup was just incredible.
Yeah.
I've tried to get you more into soccer lately, and I think you have. The World Cup was super fun. Did you get to watch the World Cup final?
I did.
Golly.
Yeah.
That was one of the best, any sport, that was one of the best games that's ever been played. Gosh, it was beautiful. And the thing about it is, yes, Messi won. Mbappe may have played one of the best games that anybody's ever played.
He did. He's probably
maybe
the best. He and the guy from Howland.
Yeah, him and Holland are definitely probably the 2 best players in the world right now.
Yeah.
But he had 3 goals. Can't remember he had 2 goals in regular time and then a goal in stoppage time, and then nailed his penalty. He probably had 4 or 5 shots in that game, and 3 of them went in, and he made his penalty.
Yeah.
And shooting isn't even his greatest attribute. He's just, him and probably Alphonso Davies, who's Canadian, are the 2 fastest players in the world. And so he's been known as like a football, you have a scat back where it's just give it to the fastest guy on the field, like the Tyreek Hill. Yeah. And so that's how it is with Mbappe. But gosh, his finishing is incredible. Everything was on target in that World Cup final. And for him to lose really sucked. But he got a World Cup when he was 18 or so. So he'll definitely get another shot at it because France is just absurd.
That's the thing when you watch the U.S. soccer team. They do a lot of things really well, but they don't finish well.
Nope.
They don't. And until that gets fixed, they're always going to be struggling to get into the World Cup, let alone make any splash in it. Pulisic's a good player, but they just don't have enough skill, just 1-on-1 or 1-on-2. They seem to really struggle with that. And these kids are playing these academies now too. So it's not like that they're not getting opportunities to get good.
Yeah.
It's just culturally, I
feel like the hardest part about it is we've got like an American bias. I remember scrolling through Instagram after the game and somebody was saying someone was essentially making the case that the U.S. had the same amount of talent as Morocco. And it's not the case yet. It's going to take another 15, 20 years before we catch up to a lot of these countries. Morocco has Hakimi, one of the best right backs in the world. Mazraoui, another one of the best right backs in the world. Their goalie, Bono's, great goalie. They have En-Nesyri, they have all these guys who are playing at the highest level. And we've got Pulisic and Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and maybe Serginho Dest. We've got 4 guys who are pretty good. But it's like we have no depth yet. It's going to take another 15 to 20 years, I think, before we get any good.
Yeah, we have to have guys we can throw in with 10 minutes left. And
that'll make a difference instead of just getting fresh legs out there.
Resting somebody.
Yeah, because, how's the thing with Morocco is they always have 1 or 2 good players to throw out there. And Morocco's not historically like great soccer country, but they're a lot better than we are, and it's ignorant to act like that's not the case.
Yeah.
But I love watching. Do you have a team that you root for, international?
Not really. Not really. I like Tottenham for some reason. And I think it goes back to the last World Cup because that's really when I first got into it. Not this World Cup, but the one before. And I remember England playing. They had Harry Kane and Harry Maguire and that goalie. I can't think of his name.
Pickford?
Yeah, Pickford. And they were playing Colombia. Two totally different styles. And Colombia was just running. It was like fast break. And it was much more methodical with England. And I think they won it like 3-2 or 2-1 or something. But I remember that Harry Kane, because the announcer said his name like 5,000
Harry
times.
Kane.
Kane. I just constantly through the thing. I was like, who is he talking about? And I figured it out. And it was the game before that Colombia game. But it was a great soccer game. It really was. So that they were two totally different teams. Neither one of them good enough to win it. But I think they, in the top 8, maybe somebody hit the top 4. I think Tottenham might have. I can't remember, but they weren't good enough to win it. France steamrolled through like they did this year until the final, at least. But so I'm still learning it. It's a sport that I'm still. I got to go to a game over in Amsterdam in October, and it was really crazy. I may have told you this. I was sitting next to a guy. I was behind the net. And I noticed that I was by myself. So people were coming and going and sitting down. And next thing you'd look over, there were 2 other people in the seat. And some guy sat next to me for a few minutes and he had good English with you. I don't know how old he was, maybe 21. He was by himself and somehow got into a very brief conversation about where I was from. And I told him Tennessee and he kind of lit up. He goes, oh yeah, I've got a Derrick Henry on my fantasy football team. Like I don't even have a fantasy football team.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, he's a great player.
And
it was cool though.
Globalization's weird. I remember I follow this guy on Twitter. I've told you about Lindy Man, but he was tweeting at some point about how he had a German teacher DM him and was like, yeah, these kids are wearing NFL t-shirts. Yeah. And I remember they played that game in Munich at the Allianz. They played the first game in Germany this year. And I think pregame, they were playing Country Roads by John Denver. Yeah. The whole entire crowd was singing in unison. And it's just like, globalization is so weird because here I am infatuated with European soccer and they're over there watching our sports.
Yeah. I follow the Titans and all these countries have like their own little club Facebook page, like from Italy or England or Germany or wherever, that they've all got their favorite team somehow. Like you'd love to say, how the hell did you pick that team? Because you could see if somebody picked the Cowboys or whoever Tom Brady was playing on. Tennessee's kind of an obscure team. I had a good year about 3 years ago. Maybe that's where people picked up on it. They are a hard-nosed team. The Titans are. They've got some real talent woes right now, but yeah, it was different. And the thing is, for all the differences in the sports, then there were some real similarities too between that Ajax game and like some pro football. The pageantry is different, but the passion is not that different. You've got people, like the Raiders fans, they just show up and they dress up and so forth. This game almost reminded me a little bit of one to watch the old Falcons down in whatever that dome was that they recently toured, the Georgia Dome.
Yeah.
How it was just a big party before, right outside the stadium. They had a couple of traditions. Apparently they get soccer balls and just kick them into the crowd, not beeline, but they just put the thing up and see where it lands. And the whole idea is for it to hit somebody on top of the head, 150 feet away, coming down 50 feet. But they get it, and then some kid would run it down and they would fight over the ball, and then they'd turn around and punt it up into the crowd. That was all standing out there. It was neat. I remember too, and the stadium looked bigger than it really is. Because it only held like 65,000 people. Our stadiums here in the South held like 100,000 people.
That's the thing.
It's like insanely large, but
that's the one thing about stadiums that I'll say is that I was really spoiled that the first 10 sporting events I went to were UT football games, because now I go to stadiums and I'm like, with the exception of Yeah, they're cute.
Cute little stadiums.
It's honestly a shame that Nissan Stadium ever existed, because it's just like, after you go to Neyland, it's like the NFL. This is supposed to be like the
Yeah, the best in the world.
this is supposed to be the best in the world. The Nissan Stadium. It's like, oh, what is this thing?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I love the old Georgia Dome. I'd be excited to go see a game in the new stadium because I haven't seen anything yet. You know what we have to do is when the World Cup comes to America, I think 2026. I think they're playing a game in it. We should definitely go.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I don't care who plays.
I don't either. Any World Cup game's a good game. So I'm excited for that. Wasn't Sean saying that he was going to go to one of the games in Mexico City?
Yeah, he's talked about that because there's some cup going on that's going on next summer or something. I can't remember which one it is.
Probably CONCACAF.
I think so.
It's like the
I
American.
think he said something about they were doing it in Seattle.
Yeah.
But I can't remember. But no, like I said, I'd love to go. It'd be fun to see all that. It would be different here too. Obviously, they had the problem with Dubai. They couldn't sell alcohol. Everybody was on edge and everything. And here, I like the fact that they're spreading it out. They're putting games in Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. And those 8 hours apart, some of these stadiums. But it ought to be like that. It ought to be cool.
Yeah.
But it'll be, because there's still 3 different cultures. Heck, there's about 10 different cultures in the U.S. when it boils right down to it.
Yeah.
You can't replace college football anywhere. You can't duplicate it or replicate it anywhere in the country like you can in the South. It's just a total religion down here.
Yeah, it's just different. But I'll get back to favorite teams. So I'll start. My favorite team and probably my sporting event ever to watch was the 2016-2017 finals when the Cavs finally beat the Warriors.
Finally, yeah.
That was... And they were down 3-1. And
To the second best player in the world and probably the third with Curry and Durant.
I don't think they had Durant yet.
Yeah.
Durant came that summer.
That
after.
summer. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what it was.
The Warriors would go on to be better, but at that point, you know, they were probably the second best team ever assembled behind the Bulls. Even at that point, which the team after that probably, you could argue, eclipsed the Bulls, or they weren't together for as long. But as far as quality, the Warriors dynasty that is still around is the second best dynasty in the history of basketball. You look at maybe the Lakers and the Celtics.
Lakers and the Celtics, yeah.
But
And the Bulls.
As
The
far as
Bulls
just-
won 6.
yeah, definitely. It's interesting to see how far it goes. But just as far as domination and like completely changing the sport, the Warriors have been incredible. But
Yeah.
gosh, it was just sheer force of will, that series, because they were down 3-1. Then I remember in that, I guess that would have made it game 5. I remember both Kyrie and LeBron scored 40.
Yeah.
It was like, all right, if you've got 82 points accounted for, you really don't need much else. And then
Putting back rebounds. All they were doing.
And I remember LeBron baited in that game 5 at the very end when they were beating them. LeBron kind of incited Draymond and somehow got him to kick him in the balls, and so he was suspended for that game 6.
Yeah.
And
I remember that. Yeah, no kidding.
yeah, and so with Draymond off the floor, they just ran through game 6, and then when it came to game 7, it was like that's pretty much how all game 7s go. They're all low scoring, nervy, just defensive battles. And that's honestly what I love watching about basketball. Is I love when players are running up and down the court and it's threes and it's dunks and it's fast breaks. My favorite thing to see is when guys just can't figure each other out. It's like a great boxing match or a great fight where both guys are afraid.
Yeah, the other one can hurt them.
Yeah.
The other one can hurt them, definitely. Yeah.
And that's what that game was. And then it was like LeBron, it got to the point at the end of that game where it was like LeBron was like, all right, ball's not going in. And so he made that, the chase down block, which he's done a million times in his career, but he never had to do it.
Never in that moment.
Never in that moment. And he was like, there's a chance I jump too early and I make a foul, or there's a chance this goes this way. But it was second nature at that point. He had prepared his whole career for that moment. And the best play he'll ever make is a defensive play. And that's cool by me. I've always been a big defensive guy in football and basketball.
But talk about teams, though. And it's weird. In the NFL now, who's going to win the Super Bowl? No. So there's favorites out there and so forth, and some teams that have won it, some teams that haven't won it. Back in the 80s, in '90s, there were three teams. One of them was the '85 Bears. The only reason that team did not win more Super Bowls is because Mike Ditka was their coach. He was not a good coach. He was just okay, but they had so much talent on that team. It was pretty. I think they won like 56-10 or 55-10 in the Super Bowl. But there were two other teams. The Dallas team that I guess came along a couple years later, which is the one that Jerry Jones first put together with who's the Miami coach. Jerry
Shula?
No.
Jimmy Johnson.
Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah.
That team, it was like that Bears team. They had the best offense and the best defense in the league. They had the best players everywhere. It was like they were just loaded. And then before that was the Joe Montana teams and Steve Young teams out at San Francisco. They won 4 Super Bowls, I believe, something like that. And they were same kind of thing. They had the best running back, they had the best quarterback, they had the best receiver, they had the best defensive end, best linebacker, and best safety, Ronnie Lott. It was just, they were just unbelievable. And football was so much different then than it is now. Granted, the players are overall bigger now, so you had to clean the game up because of all the concussions. It's a wonder more players haven't like literally just gotten killed out on the football field. And that's back when they would teach tackling. You were taught to launch yourself.
Yeah.
You go head first, line across the ground. You would your head would go straight into somebody's chest plate.
And they'd put like egg cartons in the helmets too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But those guys mean as heck, man. They were such just brutal athletes. Me, of them can't walk. Me, of them can't think or do anything. I had a discussion one time. I was skiing over in Switzerland, and we were in a place having dinner, and somebody and soccer was on and brought up, well, but the American sport, you've got all those pads. And I said, yeah, but it's like putting on a motorcycle helmet and running head first into a brick wall. I said, I don't care what kind of helmet you got on. That hurts. And I said, and you got guys flying at you because running 25 mile an hour and you just collide. I've seen stars myself even playing when I was young.
And that's the thing. I don't know anything about rugby. I don't know the rules, but you don't tackle with your head in rugby.
No, you don't. You arm tackle. They call it arm tackling in football.
Yeah.
That's just the way you have to do it because you can't do it like that. You kill yourself.
But for 25 years or so, that was how they taught you how to tackle.
Oh, yeah.
Put your head through his head.
Put his head through his head. You want your face mask to hit the ball.
Yeah.
Basically. That's where you would want to place your head is on the ball. Trying to knock it out.
When I always played, the way I always thought about it was head on the hip. If you could get your head on the outside hip, it didn't really matter who was running the ball, except for I remember I did that on Nathan Cottrell, and who I think he played for the Jaguars. He was on the Jaguars practice squad for a couple years. And he wasn't any bigger than me. He was just a D1 athlete. I remember like feeling him, and it was just different. Some guys are just made of uranium.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you know.
Play for West.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I remember. Yeah, feeling Nathan Cottrell's strength. I mean, he had a 45-inch vertical or something. I remember him being by far the most athletic guy I've ever played against.
Yeah.
But I wanted to touch on like concussions. I was listening to Joe Rogan talk with somebody about concussions, and it was interesting because they were saying like in boxing, it's explicitly stated if you want to be one of the best boxers in the world, look at Muhammad Ali, can barely move, could barely talk towards the end of his life. It was though. If you want to box, don't expect to live a good life after.
Yeah.
But I think it was dumb, but they convinced a lot of these guys, with the helmet, you're safe.
Yeah.
And they should have just been honest about it up front and just been like, look, you're putting yourself at risk on every play. I remember this was only in preseason, like fall camp, but I remember watching a friend of mine have his last play ever 3 yards in front of me. We were running double slants, and Griffin DeLong was at linebacker, and Evan, our backup quarterback, threw the slant to the wide receiver. And I remember he threw it. And the second the ball came out of his hands, he goes, "Oh shit!"
You're right. We knew what was getting ready to happen.
Yeah, he threw it, and Hunter, the guy who got knocked down, barely even made contact with the ball and just got destroyed.
Yeah.
And he got up and he was walking around like, I don't know. He got right back up and he's like, I'm fine. I'm fine.
The whole point of football, too, for a long time, and it's gotten different. And it's odd to see how players have adjusted to this. But the goal for a long time was to rattle the other quarterback. If you put him out of the game, you had a shot if you weren't a very good team. But now it's different. They don't try to hurt players. They try to tackle hard and all this. You just cannot launch yourself into somebody. But I remember when Tennessee was playing, Ed Chester from Florida was playing, we were playing Florida, and he made some comment during the week leading up to the game about wanting to put Peyton Manning out and wanting to hurt his knees or something. He goes, we're going to try to hurt his knees. And Peyton was a senior. I remember Peyton actually addressed it, and he goes, I think what he actually said was, I know Ed Guy. He goes, he doesn't necessarily mean that, but he did mean it. If we can get him rattled, that's half of it. But the whole point was to knock the other quarterback senseless. And
that's one thing I noticed playing like football growing up. I would say growing up, you don't have the parity that you have in the NFL where every team's good. Same in college where just about every team's good. I'll say 95% of the games I played were won on the first drive. There was a team that came out and they're like,
set the tone.
Yeah, we're going to be physical. This is going to hurt. And the team that did that won every single game. Whoever was willing to be the mean ones won.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to the creation of football. It was created in World War I as a sport for the soldiers to play, to pass their time.
Yeah.
It's
more. Yeah, it was a half-ass copy of rugby.
Yeah.
It got banned in a lot of places because people were dying playing the sport. We've seen all these high-profile injuries lately. I remember Tennessee was playing Air Force. It's been 20 years ago.
That was my very first football game.
Was it?
I was at that game.
Yeah, but we took you to one earlier. You went to one earlier because you left as soon as the band stopped playing. You were about 4 or 5. You were like, okay, I'm ready to go home now. We were playing at Auburn, and we left in the first quarter. We got down like 17-0. But that was, I remember taking that. And I remember Tennessee was much more talented than Air Force, but they ran this kind of funky offense. We never could figure it out. And they threw a ball that was going down the west sideline, a receiver, and Inky Johnson came up to make the tackle, and you could hear it up in the stands, and everybody started talking. He went down, and I remember never taking my eyes off of him. And you get to know a couple of people around you, and I was like, he's hurt really bad. He hasn't moved. And I said, I could see the way he fell when he got hit. He just collapsed. He had some kind of nerve injury, and he has no use of his arm.
Yeah.
That's brutal.
I guess I had thought that it was my first game we'd ever been to only because I remember them introducing Robert Meacham, his picture up on the Jumbotron, and everybody screaming. And I was like, yeah, I like him. And then I remember the ambulance coming out onto the field. And I remember probably thinking, I was like, so I guess guys just die every game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Every game somebody just dies. He didn't die, but it looked like it.
Yeah, that was one of those things like this guy from Buffalo a couple of weeks ago. When he went down, you knew it. And it was odd. Just nobody around me saw it, but I remember just keeping my eyes on it. He was not moving. He was face down. They couldn't get to him fast enough. He took a hell of a hit, though. I will say that. The guy lowered his head and put his helmet right into his shoulder. Just basically killed his arm. He never had use of it after that. It was just a kind of, he just holds it down.
Or are you talking about Inky Johnson?
Inky Johnson.
Yeah. I thought you were talking about T. Higgins. Because it's weird. The guy who did that grew up down the street. REM went out. 15 minutes away.
Yeah. 15, 20 minutes from here. Exactly. Yeah. Great players, man. I tell you. And it's funny because Knoxville has produced some really good football players. Harrison Smith's a really good player. There's been others that have come out of here. Roy Thompson. But the odd thing is there's never any good basketball players coming out of Knoxville. When I was in high school, we had 3 or 4 7-footers in high school around.
But how many?
Yeah, they don't even have them now. But there were some kids that went to South Doyle There were 2 or 3 of them. They were all 6'9", 6'10", 6'11". Spurlock or Sperling, I can't remember. Doug Roth at Carnes was 6'11". Farragut High School had 2 7-footers back in the 80s, back in the early 80s. One of them went to Minnesota. And that most athletic of them, and he wasn't the best basketball player. He was good. His name was Mike McGill or something. Played for Central. And we were getting beat by about 15 points with about 2 minutes left. So the coach put me in. I was a sophomore. And so this guy, I think, was a senior. And I was trying to guard him. We were playing zone at this point. And I remember he got the ball under the bucket and went up and dunked it, held onto the rim. His knees come up. One of them caught me under the chin. My neck swelled up immediately. I thought I was going to die right then, but he was a really athletic guy. I think he ended up going to Texas Tech or something to play basketball. We had a lot of good players here. Austin East had a bunch of good players that played. Probably the best high school basketball player to ever come out of Knoxville was Elston Turner. And that would have been in the 70s. And he went to Austin East. He ended up going to Ole Miss. He ended up being like the player of the year in the SEC. And played for Seattle or somebody, but he was like the best player we've ever had. He was a 6-man one year in basketball in the NBA. We do not put them out. Every now and then you'll get a kid, one from Corner, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember who that is. Played 5 years ago for Tennessee. Good player. Bowden. Bowden.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's probably the only one I can think of that made an NBA team and actually played some.
I saw this on Twitter recently. I think he is the leading scorer in the G League right now.
He may be. He's a good player.
Yeah, he's 6'6" guard. He can do just about everything. He's just 100 of those guys.
They're everywhere.
Who can shoot 3% better and can dribble a little better and make a little bit better decisions. And it's so incremental differences between these guys. It makes a lot of a difference.
The African League plays some on ESPN. There's some really, really good athletes there. They're not anywhere close to the end, but there's a real push for those guys. Cause I mean, there's 50 of them that are 6'11". They're everywhere. They're that big down there. They're great athletes. They just don't have the infrastructure for teaching skills.
Yeah. And it's like Embiid. I think Embiid was Luke Mbamute's camp when he was like 12 or something. And he had never even played basketball before. They were just like, this is the biggest guy in our town. Let's go send him to this basketball camp.
If it'll work.
And apparently he wanted to quit. He didn't want to keep playing. But it's like, there's so many of these good guys out there that you've got to just find some rich dude that, it's like with Catholic, they pay a lot of these kids to come to their school. You just got to find some rich dude at a prep school who's like, I'll sponsor that kid.
Yep.
You got to get these guys over to where they're like, they can get in a real like development system. Cause I think Embiid went and played at Montverde, which is the best.
Yeah. Good.
Them and what's the other school up in Virginia? But those are the two best basketball country.
Something. Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Mouth of.
It's where Carmelo.
Yeah.
I know that. But I remember watching a play of Embiid. It was when he was on the JV team at Montverde. Catches. It's like a wide open, fast break. Catches the ball because he's so big and lanky. He's a dang Clydesdale. He goes up to shoot and he doesn't realize that he's 5 feet beyond the basket. So he's out of bounds and he just goes up to shoot and then like, shit, throws it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of those guys out there, and the NBA will keep getting better because they've got people from all over the world playing. You look at the 2 best players in the world right now, neither of them were born in the U.S. That's the cool thing about it.
Neither was Embiid.
Yeah, probably the 3.
Yeah.
But I know you got to be somewhere. If you want to go ahead and wrap up, we can. So it's 7:43. So we put in about an
hour and a half.
And it was cool because we only touched on sports. We could make 3 more podcasts out of music and movies, books, actors, different random memories, traveling. So
traveling.
That's cool. We can just do it every week. If you've got a couple hours every week.
No, I do.
Alrighty. We'll go and wrap it up. Thanks, y'all.
Sure, man.